Ian. Good morning, and thank you for taking the time to talk with ROCKNEWS Switzerland. I hope you had a good voyage.
Yes, I came in yesterday afternoon, so I'm rested. Had some work to do yesterday afternoon, but heading back tomorrow on a flight and back to conclude this is the last full week of press and promo I've been doing. So I've been working for the last 6 weeks, doing lots of promo trips to different cities and an awful lot of Zoom calls to make. And so the new album is released last week and number 2 in the German album charts. So we have obviously we're reaching the end of the promotional period.
Okay.
So fire away, how can I help you?
Yeah, I think we're going to talk a bit about Ian Anderson and JETHRO Tull, and so let's start with that. In 1976, the year JETHRO Tull released the album Too Old to Rock and Roll, Too Young to Die. You're 77 years now, and still in the business. So when are you too old to rock and roll?
When Keith Richards dies.
Okay, why that?
Well, because the Stones, I suppose, are the longest surviving real rock band. And Mick Jagger seems to be in pretty good shape.
Yeah.
Keith Richards, I'm not sure about, and but they're pretty old guys. They're older than me.
Yeah.
And so they're a good example. Paul McCartney is older than me too. Elton John is same age as me, and there are a few others who are younger than me, like Phil Collins, for whom he is definitely too old to do anything.
Yeah.
Not too old, just he's been very unlucky with his health.
Yeah.
And so as long as you're feeling mentally and physically focused and capable of doing things, well, we don't have a time limit. If I was a British Airways 787 pilot, I would have had to have retired 12 years ago. And so I think of myself belonging to a profession where we, like a cowboy in a Western movie, we die with our boots on.
Okay.
We don't quietly fade away. We carry on until something forces us to quit, which could be anything. I mean, it could be obviously many past members of our band have been unlucky with health and are not any longer able to play music or function properly, so it's some of them have sadly passed away. So I'm so far quite lucky. But I always eat my greens. I eat my spinach and my cabbage.
Okay. Would you have dreamt as a 17-year-old boy that you would still be on stage 60 years later?
Well, it didn't seem entirely improbable, in the sense that my heroes when I was growing up as a teenager, my heroes weren't other people in the world of pop music or rock and roll. My heroes were jazz musicians and blues musicians, and many of those who didn't succumb to drink and drugs, they were old men. And so the idea that my musical heroes were people who were my father's age didn't seem so strange. And I thought, well, if you're lucky and you're able to continue and people want to come to your performances, or you can make a new record, then why not? But the reality of it is that I thought when I started, if I'm lucky, maybe I'll have 2 or 3 years of a little bit of success, make a record, and then if that doesn't continue, then I'll be find something else to do, maybe in the music business, to be record producer or work for a record company or do something. So I mean, I had alternative plans if things didn't work out. But you know, we were lucky, and we did have had a long musical career, and so it worked out pretty well. And I'm in that situation now that some of my musical heroes were when some 17, 18-year-old fan listens to them for the first time and thinks, wow, I want to do that. Because we do have some younger fans who are excited by the music of the great era of classic rock music, you know, from mid-60s onwards, really. A huge success, particularly from British acts, to some degree in the USA, but a lot of British rock bands who began in the late 60s and perhaps by the early 70s were internationally well known. You know, they are the great classic rock bands of the period, and it's hard to go today very far without comparing their music with music today. You know, if you had to choose between Ed Sheeran and, I think of another singer-song, Cat Stevens, let's say, a singer-songwriter of the early 70s. I mean, surely you couldn't have any hesitation in saying, well, actually, Cat Stevens was a great singer-songwriter, not only in terms of performance, but the fact that the music and the songs that he wrote, we never heard that before.
Yep.
Whereas somebody like Ed Sheeran, no offence to Ed Sheeran, he's a very talented pop singer and pop songwriter, but I don't think you can claim that it's very original, because the way he sings, contents of his lyrics, music, it's stuff we've heard many times over the years, like Taylor Swift. It's to some people it seems new, but you know, for people like me who've been exposed to music for 60 years, then it doesn't sound, well, actually closer to 70 years, it doesn't sound very interesting or new. So I'm grateful that we are part of that classic rock tradition, progressive rock, folk rock, whatever you want to call it.
Okay. Besides the musician, you're also a businessman, father of a family, protector of wild cats and endangered horses, I read. Have your priorities changed in your life?
A little bit. I try to make a little free time for myself, in the sense of having one day a week maybe when I can indulge in something fulfilling outside of my music work. I like to visit places and to explore as a tourist. Very often places that I've been to 10, 20, 30 times to do concerts, but I've never been a tourist in that city. And quite often those cities are actually in the UK. So there are a lot of places in the UK that I would just like to go and visit, because they're not necessarily very attractive, but they're part of the culture of the country where I was born and brought up and where I live. And I'm interested to see some of those places without the pressure of having to be at sound check by 4 o'clock and do a concert and check out of my hotel at 7 o'clock the next morning to get a train to somewhere else. You know, so I quite like having that privilege of making a little free time, because really for, I suppose, 50 years of my musical life, I've hardly had a day off. You know, I've never had a weekend off. We always work weekends, so I don't very often have private time, but I'm trying to make sure that I keep some days in my diary free to be a tourist. and I travel by train usually.
Okay.
So I'm a public transport person.
Yeah.
Which is funny because I'm not a public guy. I'm very private and I'm a loner. I think the reason I like public transport is no one looks at me, or I'm just a little old man, getting on a bus or a train, and people don't pay attention.
Yeah.
So it's I like the anonymity of being in a public place, but not actually having to interact with people, because I don't like company. I eat alone.
Okay.
I travel alone most of the time, and I don't actually enjoy socializing. The idea of going to a party or going out for dinner with a lot of people, it just fills me with horror.
Yeah.
It did when I was a child, and it still does today. So I'm the lonely guy in the cowboy western.
Okay.
I'm the guy smoking a cheroot with a hat pulled down. I'm Clint Eastwood with a flute.
Okay. That's a nice picture. Okay. Something else I wrote about you. You're the member of the Order of the British Empire. Is this a war? What does this mean to you? And do you sometimes wear the associated medal?
I've no idea where it is. That's the problem. I don't know where I have a Grammy Award. I don't know where that is either. It's very nice to receive recognition, but it's not important to me in the sense that, for instance, if I was to put gold records on the wall of my house, I would have to close my eyes every time I walk past them, because I don't like to see things that are, awards or recognition. It's nice to have got it, but I don't want to confront it every day. I don't. When I wake up in the morning, I don't need to be reminded of who I am and what I do.
Yeah.
I don't need to be made to feel good. And I'm sure there are plenty of people in my business who do have their gold records on the wall. When they walk downstairs in the morning, they walk past their collection of gold albums and they go, yeah, that's me, yeah. Which is completely absurd, it's just, to me, it would seem ridiculous to have to be reassured by those kinds of recognitions. So having an MBE, which is, as I describe it, it's the Village Postman Award. The MBE is a member of the British Empire. Well, first of all, we don't have an empire anymore. We haven't had since Victorian times. And to be a member just means, okay, well, you've sort of been recognised, but they give MBEs to the village postman in a little island somewhere off the coast of Scotland for a lifetime in delivering the post to people. It's I'm making a joke of it, but it's nice to have had. And when the then Prince Charles gave me my MBE at Buckingham Palace, I thought he won't know who I am. But he did, and he reminded me. He said, "Oh, I remember I came to your fish farm factory and how are things going and blah 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 blah." So he was he knew who I was. In fact, the first thing he said is, "You've cut your beard short, and your hair." And I said, "Well, yes, I have. My mother-in-law made me trim my hair and beard. She thought I looked, untidy." But so yes, it's nice to have, and not really very much a part of my life. And somewhere locked up somewhere is an MBE, some little medal you might put on. But I can't think. I did see somebody once wear one. It was Gary Brooker of Procol Harum. And I think we went for dinner with him and his wife, and he was actually wearing his MBE, OBE, whatever it was, on his lapel of his jacket. Well, it's like if you sign your name, Ian Anderson, MBE. It's very ostentatious. It's showing off, So I wouldn't do that. I think the only time I have used MBE Doctor of Literature next to my signature was on my most recent reapplication for my firearms licenses. And I thought putting those credentials after my name might just smooth the way a little bit when it comes to them. I mean, I've had a firearms license since 1976 or 77, something like that. So it's been renewed many times over the years, but it's one of those things where you realise sooner or later they're going to say, wait a minute, you're too old to be shooting guns, or we don't know who you are, because the people who signed the things before are no longer in the police force. They don't know who you are. So in a situation like that, it could be useful, but that's about the only time I can recall using any of those initials after my name. Otherwise, I wouldn't do it out of embarrassment, really, because it would sound like I was showing off, trying to be important. So,
okay. You even told about that your last album, Curious Remnant, was released a week ago. For me, it still sounds like Jethro Tull in the early years. The distinctive voice, the flute, borrowings from folk, jazz, classical and prog rock, a little quieter perhaps, alternating between acoustic and electric instruments, and yet it seems fresh. How can a band still develop and create something new after so many years and so many albums?
Because I'm really clever. No, it's continuity is an important thing to me, but it has to be an equal balance to evolution. So, in the sense that I'm a student of history, but I'm very interested in current affairs and politics and what the near future might bring. To me, these are two equally important things. We learn from history, but we live in the present day, so being locked into the past is not a good idea. Same thing with making music. I like the idea of there being some thread of continuity in what I do, but I don't want to feel like I'm just repeating myself and recreating something I did 20 or 50 years ago.
Okay.
And I'm a record producer, so that's part of my job, is to make sure that the nuances are right. So with a song, it's a melody, some chords or lyrics. It starts off in a very basic way, and then the next stage is having some idea of a possible arrangement and letting the band have some information so they can at least have the basic elements prepared so we can rehearse, and then that's the exciting bit, is working out things together in the studio. And at that point I am a performer, but I'm also thinking as a record producer, I'm thinking how to shape this arrangement, how does it fit in with other songs that might be part of the same album. So I'm wearing a more objective hat of the record producer, and I feel I can call myself a record producer because back in 1971 I went to meet George Martin, the Beatles producer, and I was asking for advice. I said, "Very nice to meet you, Mr. Martin, and I wonder, could you just give me some advice, because I've just produced an album, Aqualung, and which I think is doing quite well." And I said, "But I think maybe I could do better if we had a real record producer, someone who was coming from the outside to help with the shaping of the record." And he said, "Well, where is your album in the charts?" And I said, "Well, yeah, it's in the top 20 or whatever it was in various countries of the world. And he said, how many records has it sold? I said, so far I think about 2 million. He said, you're a record producer.
Okay. This year you will be on tour. I've seen that you will play about nearly 35 shows.
Well, it's actually about 60, but they're not on. Tickets are not on sale for all of them yet, so we don't announce them until people can buy 60. The tickets.
Cool. This is quite exhausting for a band of old gentlemen, isn't it?
Well, most of us are older. I mean, I'm far and away the oldest. Our bass player David Goodyear is, he must be 65, I should think. John O'Hara's probably 62. Scott Hammond is a bit younger. He's probably, maybe he's just 50. And Jack Clark, who joined the band effectively, although he's played with us a few times over the last 3 years, he joined the band effectively last February. He is only 30, as far as I know. I think, yeah, he's 30 years old. So he's far and away the youngest, but you know, he's grown up musically within the tradition of folk rock, but he knows about other things too. At Soundcheck a few weeks ago in Italy, I heard him playing something at Soundcheck. I said, Jack, what's that you just played? He said, oh, it's he looked embarrassed. I said, that's Miles Davis track from the 1950s. And he looked embarrassed and said, yeah, that's right. I said, I didn't know you were interested in Miles Davis or jazz. He said, I'm not. He said, I just heard it being played in somewhere. And it was because he'd been in the only restaurant near the hotel that they were staying in Florence was the Jazz Bistro. And so because it was just next to the hotel, they went to eat there, and so they were playing jazz music, and he heard this song, and kind of in his head, so he was playing it at Soundcheck. And I thought, well, it's interesting because someone who didn't, it's a missing part of his musical education, and lots of other people I've mentioned to him he's never heard of, let alone heard the music, and then other things he knows really well. But just because it's the music history of pop and rock music is huge, and so if you're growing up with music today, you could very easily have heard this, that, but you've missed out on a lot of other stuff which progressively over many years you might learn about, especially if you lived alongside that evolution of music. But I think it's important for all the musicians that I play with to have a broad musical understanding, not to just be interested in one kind of music. And so they all have interests in, three of the guys, you know, in jazz, classical music. Their background is not so much in rock music, it's more to do with jazz or maybe a little bit of folk music. And in one case, one of the guys studied at the Royal College of Music and composition and percussion. And so, you know, it's good having, and they all read music. All the guys in the band, you know, they read and write music. They've been taught. They've all had an academic exposure to music, whereas I didn't. I don't read music. I imagine it in my head and feel it here. So I don't do the Dead Sea Scrolls, as I call them.
As a band who had many hits and many albums, lots of albums, do you have a favorite song or a favorite album of Jethro Tull? Is it possible?
Well, it changes from time to time. I mean, it's hard to have a favourite album. If you ask me which is my favourite cat, I would be going through a list of more than 20 cats and all but 2 of them are dead. And to say that one of them was my favourite would make me feel instantly. I would feel bad, because if the other cats knew that, they would be really upset if they weren't the favourite.
Yeah.
Same with children. You can't say, well, I like my son, but I don't like my daughter, or vice versa. You can't have a favourite child or a favourite grandchild. So, I mean, I find it a little bit difficult to answer with a single favourite, but I would certainly say that the first and most important Jethro Tull album is not the very first one, is the second album called Stand Up, because that was the album where I brought in, when I wrote all the songs, and I included elements of music from different sources. It was more eclectic. It drew upon classical music, some folk music, some world music, and it wasn't a blues album, which is where we started. So that's an important one for me, because it's the first, wow, this is really a Jethro Tull album, as opposed to the first one, which was called This Was Jethro Tull. And I did that on purpose.
Yeah.
The record company said, well, that's a weird title for an album. I said, oh no, but this was Jethro Tull. By the time it comes out and it's sold on sale in shops or whatever, we will have moved on. So this was Jethro Tull back in July of 1968. But it won't necessarily be Jethro Tull in July of 1969, and it wasn't. So that's an important one, but other albums that I think are important are Thick as a Brick, because it was a big step into a crazy world of prog rock, and Songs from the Wood, because it was bringing in more obvious elements of folk music. So there's 3 albums. And a particular song that I was just rehearsing again with the band a couple of days last week was a song called Budapest, and it's a song it's quite a long song in its original arrangement, but it embodies again lots of elements of music that for me make it interesting as a composition, and lyrically it's telling a little bit of a non sequitur story. There is no conclusion, no follow-up to it. And I like the obliqueness of the storyline, but I also like the fact that it is a paean to femininity. And some people might think it's a bit sexist, especially by standards of today, but it's a song about look, but don't touch. It's admiration for an athletic young female, but no more. Just enjoy the view for 10 seconds and move on. That's what that song. I wrote it the next morning after a concert where there was someone helping with the catering in the backstage area, and it was literally 10 seconds of seeing a person and going, wow, she looks nice. The next morning I woke up and our guitar player had asked the promoter who was the girl doing the catering, and he said, oh, she's one of the Hungarian junior Olympic athletes. And I explained to her, toned body, and she wasn't muscular enough to be a 100-meter sprinter, and she wasn't skinny enough to be a marathon runner. She was sort of in between, which is why it starts off with the words, I think she was a middle distance runner. The translation wasn't clear because the promoter didn't speak very good English. And so sometimes when you have a little thought occurs to you, when you wake up in the morning, it's the first thing that goes through your head. Oh, quick, write that down. And I had a guitar with me in the hotel room. I think she was a middle distance runner, and those were the first 3 chords. By the time I got to the airport, I had half the song written. Which is that I like things when they're spontaneous. Yeah. It's the equivalent of Cartier-Bresson as a photographer, yes, and his supposedly famous quote to seize the moment. You know, it won't come again. It's being recognizing something special and getting it. And that, I suppose, sums me up as a songwriter too. I think if there's a little idea that comes to me, I want to move with it straight away. It's very frustrating if you're somewhere and you can't do anything because you don't have a pen to write anything down, or you're sitting on a plane, or walking through a crowd of people. You can't develop the idea, and it's like seeing a little butterfly and wanting to reach out and gently catch it, but you can't because it's flown away. So perhaps some of my best songs are still out there somewhere, flying around, waiting for the moment.
Yeah. In a review that was made in March this year, I read that Ian Anderson struggles with the modern world. Is that true? And other question: was everything better in the past?
Well, you're speaking to someone who's always updating and doing the updates on the latest software for recording technology, for photographic technology, things that I use daily. And I don't buy a new phone every year, but I do usually want to have something that represents usable modern technology. So I've been involved in technology from the very beginning of my musical life, always evolving. And I think that's part of what, in a way in which I do embrace the modern world, because I have to. It's tools of the trade. You know, if I was a plumber, I would need to have a good wrench and a hacksaw for cutting through pipes and various tools that I would carry with me in order to do my job. And so, you know, the recording technology, I don't do video, but I do photography, and so I always want to not only have the software technology, but also to know how to use it in my profession, because I am a professional photographer when it comes to album covers and artwork and so on. So I like to keep up with technology, but the modern world, in some senses, I don't have a lot of interest in. But that's to do with social media and other things that I think are not really, certainly not important to me. Yeah. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of younger people, particularly school children, rely on social media and have lost the skills of being able to communicate with each other or with their parents, which I think are very important. And so, in many ways, there are aspects of modern society that I hope in 10 or 20 or 30 years' time will be put into perspective, and that people won't be wasting so much of their lives glued to their cell phones. And I mean, most people these days don't even have a computer. You know, everything is text messages or WhatsApp or whatever. And I use those things too, but most of the time I will sit and write a proper email where the grammar is correct, the spelling is correct, the paragraphs, the space. I want it to read like a letter. You know, it's like writing lyrics. I take trouble to write emails, long form use of the language, and just shortcut text messages or something. If somebody sends me a text message, I may well reply in the text message platform because it's easier than starting again. But normally I would send an email out of choice because it's more like writing a letter. So that's where email began, and I remember in 1995 emails were not common but were beginning to get used. By 1998, when we also established our website, that was really for me the dawning of a new age of computers being an opportunity for communication, for sending files, for the beginning of an age that led me to, first of all, get rid of our travel agents. What's the point in having a travel agent now? Because you go online to British Airways or whatever it might be, you book your flights, you choose what you want to do, and you do it, and it's done. Get a travel agent to do it. First of all, explaining the parameters of making a booking. They don't understand it because they're not on tour with a rock band. They might pick a hotel for you that's miles away from the airport or from the venue or whatever. They just don't think. And so travel agents became immediately redundant. And I've never used a travel agent since. I do all the bookings of flights and hotels for the band, usually on a Sunday. That's what I'm a professional travel agent on a Sunday. Because I keep getting messages from the bank saying, you spent thousands and thousands of pounds on flights today. Is this fraudulent or was it really you? I said, no, it was really me. That's what I do on Sundays.
Good. If you had the choice among all the people on this planet, dead or alive, who would be your ideal guest for a dinner?
And to be on stage with?
No, on a dinner.
On a dinner?
Sitting there.
Well, it would be the same as everybody, wouldn't it? It would be Jesus Christ, Adolf Hitler. It would be all the good and bad people of the planet. Historically. I'm sure if you asked anybody that question, there would be a lot of people would figure on it. There might be somebody who wants to meet the current goalkeeper of some Bavarian football team, but most people, they would be, I'd quite like to meet Jesus. Mm-hmm. I mean, Adolf Hitler's a bit transparent, but out of all the bad, probably the baddest man ever in historical times that we know of, and know a lot about his background, is Heinrich Himmler. Yeah. And it's not a morbid curiosity, and certainly nothing to do remotely with any kind of a anti-Semitic approval of what he did. It's by understanding how evil people are and how did they become, how did that happen? Because they didn't emerge from the womb, as an embodiment of Satan. They emerged from the womb as a little crying baby. And maybe from that moment onwards, maybe their mother didn't care for them enough. But within weeks, months and years, things evolved to make that person become totally inhuman. And so I'm kind of interested to know about people and what their motives were. How did they become the way they were? In the case of Jesus of Nazareth, then it would be because he was born into a time of Roman occupation, and he was Jewish. He was a Jewish renegade prophet, and then somewhere along the way, we only know a tiny little bit about his childhood or early adulthood. And then suddenly the next thing we know, he's in the desert for 40 days and 40 nights being tempted by the devil and then being baptized by John the Baptist. So there's a very limited amount of information. How did Jesus of Nazareth evolve and become Jesus the Christ of Christianity? That to me is fascinating. It would be sitting down with Jesus to say, rather like you're doing with me, or how did this happen? How did you get to be? And of course he would probably feature on the list of 50% of the people you could ask that question to, even if you weren't a Christian. And I'm not really a Christian. I'm a pantheist, or a panentheist to be more precise. But I have huge respect for Christianity as the religion of the country I was brought up and born into, and I support the Christian church every year by doing fundraising concerts for our great cathedrals and churches. So I'm an active participant in ongoing Christian worship, but I don't call myself a Christian.
Yeah.
and some people might find that very difficult to understand, but I would say, well, I'm really interested in paleontology. I'm really interested in the early forms of life on Earth, dinosaurs. But it doesn't mean when I step into the shower in the morning that I have scaly skin and a long pointy tail and sharp teeth. You don't necessarily have to be a dinosaur to be interested in dinosaurs, and you don't necessarily have to be a Christian to be passionately interested in the history of the religion, indeed in the context of other religions too. So that's what makes me tick. So Jesus would be in there, and it'd be interesting because if you had Jesus, Heinrich Himmler, and the goalkeeper from Bayern Munich sitting at the table, I wouldn't need to say anything.
Yeah.
They would probably at each other.
Yeah, that's maybe you're right. Yeah. So let's come to my last question, because you have more work to do this day. It's a question I ask nearly everybody I do interviews with. If today were the last day of your life, is there something you would regret never have done?
We're talking about non-sexual acts, are we? No, I think that there are things that I regret not having done, but I'm not brave enough. I don't have a head for heights. I don't like, being. So I regret not having done many of the things that I know other people find very exciting. Mm-hmm. Bungee jumping, paragliding, hot air ballooning. But these are not for me. I would find it very frightening, and I'm not brave enough. I also perhaps regret not having served my time in the military, because conscription ended by the time I was old enough to join the army. And I sometimes regret not having served my country in that way, because I think it's part of the experience of growing up and having to do something that perhaps you're physically, actively, or even morally opposed to, ethically opposed to. But I think it's probably something that, in a way, I regret not having put myself to that test. But other than that, I think pretty much anything I wanted to do, I could do. If I wanted to be a Spitfire pilot, then I would be able to get not now, but 30, 40 years ago, I could have, taken a private pilot license, lessons, learned to fly a plane, got a twin engine rating, and maybe gone on to fly vintage aircraft from World War II. Maybe I could have done that. Yeah. And it'd be easy to say I regret not having flown in a classic aircraft of that era, which obviously was before I was born. Easy to say that I regret it, but on the other hand, I remember sitting in the cockpit of a Spitfire and thinking, holy shit, this is so claustrophobic. Yeah. I mean, it really is incredibly small. The aircraft is not small. The aircraft's actually quite big compared to many other. The ME-109 is a much smaller aircraft, but even more cramped. And but there's a lot of engines sitting in front of you. Big Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. I like to think that maybe I could have done that, but I don't think I would have been brave enough. Yeah. So some things like that, yes, I'm just not made for that. Maybe I could say I regret never having had a homosexual experience, because I can't tell you what it's like. Yeah. I could say I regret not having had a drug experience, because I've never smoked a joint, let alone cocaine or heroin or whatever, I could tell you that I regret not having tried drugs. But in a way, I don't have to, because there's a 50% chance that I will end my life on a morphine drip, terminally ill from something. And so, that's an experience that I might still have.
Yeah.
I think gay sex is probably ruled out forever, though. I think that's probably not going to happen.
Okay. Thank you very much for talking with me. I wish you...
I have been asked, by the way...
To talk?
No, about gay sex. I've had a couple of very flattering propositions.
Yeah.
And last time it happened, I gave the guy a big hug and I said, listen, if I was going to do this with anybody, it would be with you. And he was... and his tears were running down his face. He was so happy. And I meant it, but at the same time I had to say, get your hand off my leg. It's you kind of know your orientation. At least I did. I think by the time I was 13, I knew very conclusively that I was what you would call straight today. But I can remember, thinking about it and recognizing my own femininity, because I have girly fingers. I play the flute.
Yeah.
I have certain aspects of my personality that are in some ways quite feminine. I've always recognized the degree to which most of us have some of the attributes, some of the characters of the opposite sex. But that doesn't lead me to question my sexuality. It just leads me to accept the fact that in some ways, I'm a big girl with a beard, But I've always recognised that since puberty. I've always known that there's a little bit of that in there. And so I'm very much at peace with my... if somebody says, what's your pronoun, as people do these days, trying to be woke and politically correct, what's your pronoun? My answer is always, you choose. Whatever you think. I won't be offended. And I wouldn't be.
Yeah.
As long as they didn't say they and play it down the middle. Somebody... I really do find prevarication irritating. So the woke speech of pronouns, when even national newspapers these days will often say they, when they know full well they're talking about a bloke who's football player or got 10 children or whatever, and they still insist on referring to, instead of saying he, they say they. Fuck off. It's so tiring. The whole woke thing has gone too far. Not that I am a Trumpist in terms of my feelings in terms of the other opposite, but I'm a realist and a practical guy. So if I see something that looks like a car, I'm going to say, hey, that's a car over there. Yeah. Well, that was a train that just went past. If I see you, I'm going to say, oh, this guy came to interview me. Yeah. And maybe I've got it wrong. Maybe you would say, actually, no, prefer you refer to me as by a different pronoun. Then fine, I've got it wrong. Sorry. But it's an understandable thing to do. And so, if it looks like a guy, I'm going to say it's he. Yeah. If it looks like a girl, I'm going to say she. And I would expect somebody to do that to me. So I'm a little irritated if somebody says, oh, what pronoun do you want to be known as? Really annoying. Anyway, but that's not being... I'm not a right winger. I'm pretty much down the middle when it comes to politics. If that's possible to be in an increasingly polarised world. Yeah. Anyway, very nice to talk to you, and I hope that you have all of this successfully recorded.
Yes.
Otherwise, it'll be very embarrassing.
Yeah. No,
It happened to me. It happened to me only once, but I spotted it straight away and said, "Excuse me, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to start this again." We weren't in record, but this happened to me on the receiving end. 2 or 3 times there had been a terrible email a week or a day or 2 later saying, "Oh, I'm afraid the journalist, his recorder wasn't working, he didn't get it, can we do the interview again?" And I've had to say, I can't, because to sit down and go through all of that again with the same person, if it's a different person, you answer things a little differently, but when it's the same person, not a good experience for anybody to have to try and recreate a spontaneous interview. Can't do it. The moment is gone. The butterfly has flown.
Okay.